Hello, my name is Jasmine, and I never thought I would be telling this story. I was an ordinary woman living my life, working hard and taking care of my family. But everything changed on October 3rd, 2023. That was the day I died. I was gone for several minutes, but in those moments, I saw something beyond this world, something that still shakes me to my core. I met Jesus, and what he showed me about the spiritual deception happening in this world, especially about race, left me speechless. I must share this with you because the truth cannot wait. The morning of October 3rd, 2023, started like any other day. I woke up early, stretched my arms, and thanked God for another day. The sun peeked through my window, casting a soft golden glow across my room. It felt like any other normal Tuesday. I got dressed in my navy blue work uniform and went to the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. My routine was simple: coffee, breakfast, then out the door to work. I worked as a caregiver at a senior living facility, taking care of the elderly. It had always been something I loved. I had a deep respect for their wisdom, their stories, and the way they saw life. That morning, I had a full schedule. I checked in on Ms. Johnson, who always had a story to tell about her younger days, and Mr. Ray, who loved to hum old gospel hymns. It was a normal, peaceful day, and I had no idea that within hours, my life would change forever. By evening, I was exhausted. My shift ended, and I was eager to get home. My son had called earlier, asking if I could bring home some of his favorite cornbread. So I made a quick stop at the bakery, grabbed the bread, and started my drive home. It had started to rain lightly, but I wasn't worried. I had driven in the rain countless times before. I turned on my favorite gospel station and hummed along to the music as I made my way down the familiar road. Then, out of nowhere, everything shifted. One moment, I was driving, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind filled with thoughts of dinner and rest. The next moment, headlights blinded me. A truck was coming fast, skidding on the wet pavement, heading directly toward me. My heart slammed against my chest as I instinctively tried to swerve, but it was too late. The impact was violent. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and a deafening noise filled my ears. I felt my body jerk forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest. Then, everything faded into nothingness. I don't remember feeling pain. I don't remember screaming. I just remember darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. There was no pain, no panic, just an overwhelming emptiness. I should have been terrified, but strangely, I wasn't. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't even in my body. I realized something was different when I looked down and saw myself lying motionless inside my crushed vehicle. I could see the shattered windshield, the way the rain was falling in slow motion, the flashing red and blue lights from the ambulance arriving at the scene. But the strangest thing? I wasn't inside my body. I felt light, almost weightless. It was like floating, but not in the way we think of on Earth. There was no gravity, no sense of up or down. I just existed, watching as paramedics rushed to my side. I saw their faces, their frantic movements as they tried to pull me from the wreckage. One of them, a young man with dark hair and worried eyes, was shouting my name. "Jasmine, can you hear me?" I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. It was as if my voice no longer belonged to me. I tried to move, but I had no control over my body. I wasn't in it anymore. As I hovered above the scene, I noticed something incredible. Everything looked clearer, brighter. I could see details I had never noticed before, raindrops shimmering like tiny diamonds, the way the grass swayed in the wind, the subtle glow of life itself. Then, I saw my mother. She had passed away 5 years earlier, but there she was, standing near the ambulance, watching everything unfold. She wasn't speaking, but her face was filled with peace. She looked at me, her eyes full of love, and suddenly, I knew I was dead. That realization should have terrified me, but instead a strange calmness washed over me. It was like I had stepped outside of time itself. The fear, the stress, the worries of the world, all of it was gone. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't like the headlights from the truck or the flashing ambulance lights. This light was alive. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was warm, embracing me like a long-lost friend. It was calling me. I felt myself being pulled toward it, and as I moved closer, a deep sense of love filled every part of me. It was like stepping into the arms of someone who had known me my entire life, someone who had been waiting for me. Then, I heard a voice. "Jasmine, come." I knew instantly who it was. Jesus. The moment I heard his voice, everything changed. I wasn't just floating anymore. I was being pulled toward the light. It wasn't frightening, nor was it something I resisted. It felt like returning home after being lost for years. The warmth, the love, the overwhelming peace. It was unlike anything I had ever known on earth. As I moved closer, I felt something I can only describe as purity, as if every burden, every mistake, and every regret I had carried in life was being stripped away. The light was not just bright, it was alive. It wasn't just around me, it was inside me. I knew who was waiting for me before I even saw him. Jesus. I didn't need an introduction, and I didn't need proof. Deep in my soul, I knew it was him. His presence was so overwhelming that I could barely take it in. It was like standing before the sun, except instead of burning, his light healed. It seeped into every part of me, filling the spaces I hadn't even realized were empty. I fell to my knees. I don't know if I had knees in that form, but I felt the action of bowing before him, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, love or reverence. Every inch of my being recognized his authority, his goodness, his power. Then he spoke again. "Jasmine, rise." I stood, and for the first time I saw him clearly. His face, oh, how do I describe it? It wasn't just beautiful, it was beyond human words. His eyes held eternity in them, a depth so profound that I felt like a child staring into the endless sky. Love radiated from him. Not the kind of love we speak of on earth, but a love so vast, so deep, that it completed me. And yet, there was something else in his gaze. Sorrow. I didn't understand it at first. Why would Jesus, the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, carry sorrow in his eyes? But before I could ask, he reached out his hand. The moment his fingers touched mine, a wave of understanding flooded over me. I saw everything. I saw the world not just as it was, but as he saw it. The pain, the deception, the way people had been led astray. I saw people dividing themselves, not realizing that they were being manipulated by forces unseen. I saw a war, not of flesh and blood, but a spiritual battle raging across the earth, and most people didn't even know they were part of it. Tears filled my eyes. I couldn't help it. "Lord, what is happening?" I whispered. Jesus looked at me with such sadness, yet his voice remained steady. "Come, Jasmine. There is something you must see." Before I could process what was happening, everything shifted. The tunnel of light stretched before me, and suddenly I was moving through it. I wasn't walking, I wasn't flying. It was like I was being carried effortlessly, gliding forward. The light wasn't just surrounding me, it was flowing through me, filling me with warmth and energy unlike anything I had ever known. I started to hear something in the distance. Music. But not the kind we hear on earth. It was pure, powerful, alive. Voices blended together in perfect harmony, singing words I didn't understand, yet somehow felt. Then, I noticed something incredible. The walls of the tunnel weren't solid. They were filled with moving images. Each one showed moments from my life, but instead of seeing them from my own perspective, I was seeing them from Jesus' eyes. I saw myself as a child, sitting alone on the playground. I had always thought I was just another kid, no one noticed. But in this vision, I saw angels standing beside me. Even when I felt lonely, I had never truly been alone. I saw moments I had forgotten, times when I had spoken kind words to a stranger, times when I had forgiven someone who hurt me, times when I had prayed in secret for people who never even knew. Every moment mattered. Every action had echoed into eternity. Tears streamed down my face. Lord, I had no idea. Jesus smiled, but there was something serious in his expression. Every choice has weight, Jasmine. Every thought, every word, every action. That is why I must show you what comes next. The tunnel shifted again, and suddenly I wasn't looking at my past anymore. I was looking at the future. The light around me dimmed, and I found myself standing in what looked like a normal city street. People walked by, going about their daily lives. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. Then, I noticed something strange. No one was speaking to each other. People moved through the streets, eyes fixed on small glowing devices implanted under their skin. Transactions were made without cash or cards, just a wave of their hands over sensors. Families sat together in restaurants, but instead of talking, they stared blankly into the air, as if being guided by something unseen. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. "What is this?" I asked. He looked at me, his face filled with sorrow. "This is what comes next." As I stood there, watching the strange, silent world before me, I turned back to Jesus. His eyes held an expression I could only describe as deep sorrow mixed with unshakable love. "Jasmine, you must understand what is happening." I wanted to ask so many questions, but before I could speak, everything around us shifted again. Suddenly, I was no longer in the city. I was standing in a place that felt more real than anything I had ever known. It wasn't heaven, not yet, but it was a place of divine presence. The air felt alive. It carried a fragrance of something indescribable, like purity, love, and holiness woven into a scent. There was no sun, yet the light was everywhere, radiating from a single source in the distance. And then he stepped forward. I had already sensed his presence, but now I saw him in fullness. Jesus. His robes were white, but not like any fabric on earth. They shimmered as if woven from light itself. His face, oh, his face was both familiar and impossible to describe. His eyes held oceans of wisdom, fire of righteousness, and depths of love so overwhelming that I felt like I could dissolve into them. I fell to my knees instantly. I wasn't forced to. My soul knew who he was, and the only thing I could do was worship. Every fiber of my being recognized him, not just as my savior, but as the very reason I existed. His voice was powerful yet gentle, filled with authority yet brimming with compassion. "Rise, Jasmine. I have much to show you." His hand reached out, and as soon as he touched me, waves of love and truth poured into me. Every fear I had ever held, every doubt, every hidden wound in my soul, he saw them all. Yet his love never wavered. "Lord, why did you bring me here?" I finally whispered. He looked at me, his expression serious. "Because the world is being deceived, and you must see the truth before it is too late." The moment he spoke those words, everything changed again. The light around us shifted, and suddenly we weren't standing in the divine presence anymore. Instead, I saw the world, but not just as we see it in the physical realm. I saw it through spiritual eyes. I saw entire cities covered in a thick, dark mist, a mist that most people couldn't see. This darkness was not natural. It wasn't the absence of light, but rather a living, creeping force wrapping itself around nations, governments, and even churches. "This is the deception, Jasmine," Jesus said. I watched in horror as people went about their lives, completely unaware. They scrolled through their phones, worked their jobs, raised their children, but something was controlling them, influencing their thoughts and emotions without them realizing it. Then, my eyes focused on a particular trend spreading across the world, a form of technology that was becoming essential to daily life. I saw people receiving implants, tiny glowing devices placed under their skin. These weren't just ordinary microchips, they were spiritual chains disguised as convenience. "This is how the world will be prepared," Jesus said solemnly. I watched as pastors stood at pulpits, telling their congregations that these new technologies were a blessing, that they were God's provision for a better, safer future. I saw Christians willingly accepting them, convinced that it was just a new way to engage with the modern world. I turned to Jesus, my heart breaking. "Lord, don't they see it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, because they do not ask me. They trust the world's wisdom over mine." I wanted to cry out, to shake them awake, to warn them, but I couldn't. This was only a vision, a warning Jesus was showing me. "Come, Jasmine," he said. "There is more." At first, I didn't understand where Jesus was taking me next. The vision shifted again, and I saw people of every race and color moving through life with deep-rooted divisions they didn't even recognize. I saw Black people carrying pain, anger, and resentment passed down through generations, sometimes without even knowing why. I saw white people carrying shame, confusion, and guilt, struggling to understand their place in the world. Then Jesus said something that shook me to my core. "Do you see? They are not each other's enemies. They are all my children." I gasped as the spiritual reality hit me. The division between black and white wasn't natural. It was engineered. I saw dark forces whispering lies into both groups, twisting history, magnifying wounds, and using pain as a weapon. For black people, the enemy whispered, "You are not valued. They will always see you as less. Hold on to your anger, never forgive." For white people, the enemy whispered, "You are responsible for everything. You are guilty by birth. You can never do enough to make up for the past." And both sides were believing the lie. Jesus turned to me, his voice filled with love and urgency. "The enemy uses history to keep them blind, but I came to set them free. There is no black, no white, only my people." Tears streamed down my face as I saw the spiritual chains wrapping around people's minds. It was never about race. It was always about control. I suddenly understood why Jesus had sorrow in his eyes. People were so focused on fighting each other. They didn't see the real battle happening above them. "Jasmine, this deception is strong, and many will be lost because of it," he said. I fell to my knees. "Lord, what can we do?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. "Tell them the truth. Some will listen, some will not. But the truth must be spoken." I could barely breathe from what I had just seen. The division, the deception, the way the enemy had twisted everything. It was overwhelming. I looked at Jesus, my soul trembling. "Lord, how did we get here? How did we let this happen?" Jesus gazed at me with such deep love and sorrow that I felt my spirit break. "Jasmine, my people have forgotten who they are." The moment he said it, understanding flooded through me. The enemy had not just divided people by race or by lies. He had stolen their identity. I saw people wandering through life without purpose, searching for meaning in temporary things. Money, power, validation from others, never realizing that they were created for so much more. Then, in a flash, I was taken to a place that looked like a great hall. It was filled with souls, not physical bodies, but beings of light, full of potential and promise. These are the ones who have yet to be born, Jesus explained. Each one is sent with a purpose. Each one is given gifts to fulfill their calling. But when they enter the world, the enemy begins his work. He confuses them, weakens them, distracts them, so they forget why they were sent. I watched as these pure souls entered the earth, and the moment they were born, the battle for their identity and destiny began. Some were raised in homes where they were loved and guided toward their divine calling. Others were led astray by broken families, addictions, or pain that made them question if they even mattered. Some were manipulated by society into believing their worth was based on their appearance, intelligence, or achievements. The enemy had an entire system designed to keep people from fulfilling the purpose God placed inside them. I turned to Jesus, heartbroken. Lord, how do we fight this? How do we wake people up? He took my hands in his and said, "Tell them who they are. Tell them why they were created. And most importantly, tell them that I have not forgotten them." Then he showed me something that gave me hope. In the middle of all this deception, I saw light rising from certain people, those who had found their purpose, who refused to be controlled by the enemy's lies. They were ordinary people, teachers, mothers, fathers, workers, students, pastors, leaders, each one carrying a light that pushed back the darkness around them. "These are my warriors," Jesus said. "They do not need swords or weapons. Their weapon is truth. The more these people spoke truth, the more chains fell off those around them. The enemy could not stop them, because truth is more powerful than any lie." I looked at Jesus, my soul burning with urgency. "I have to go back, don't I?" He nodded. "Yes, Jasmine. But first, there is one last thing I must show you." The moment Jesus spoke those words, everything around us shifted again. The warmth and peace of his presence were still there, but what I saw next shook me to my core. I was standing in what looked like a massive city, larger than anything I had ever seen. But something felt wrong. The buildings were sleek and modern, with glowing screens everywhere. The streets were silent, though thousands of people moved through them. There were no cars. People simply walked in perfect lines, their faces emotionless, their eyes locked on invisible data streams projected in front of them. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. "Lord, what is this?" I asked. His face was sorrowful. "This is the world as it will be if they do not wake up." I watched as people went through their day routines like machines. They worked, they ate, they shopped, but something was missing. No one laughed, no one cried, no one questioned anything. Then I saw the source of control. Above the city, a massive holographic image of a leader was displayed on towering screens. He was charismatic, well-spoken, and people looked up to him with admiration and devotion. "This is the one the world will follow," Jesus said. "The one they will trust, but they will not see the chains he places upon them until it is too late." I saw governments promoting unity, safety, and peace, but behind their words was something sinister. People willingly gave up their freedoms, believing they were making the world better. And then I saw something that made me tremble. People were lined up in massive crowds, stepping forward to receive something. At first I couldn't see what it was, but as I got closer, my heart dropped. They were receiving an upgrade, a small implant just under their skin. I turned to Jesus in shock. "Lord, is this the mark?" He shook his head. Not yet, but this is how they will be led to accept it. Step by step, deception by deception. First, they will make it convenient. Then they will make it necessary. And finally, they will make it mandatory. Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to scream, to warn them, to tell them to stop, but they couldn't hear me. They were too entranced, too deceived, too willing to trust the system. I turned to Jesus, desperation in my voice. Lord, how do we stop this? His voice was filled with both sorrow and hope. Some will listen, some will not. But those who know my voice will not be deceived. You must tell them. Warn them before the time comes. Then everything shifted again. I found myself standing in an open field. The city was gone. The towering screens had vanished. Everything was silent. Jesus stood beside me, looking out over the horizon. I could feel the weight of what he had shown me pressing down on my soul. Jasmine, the world has forgotten the power of choice, he said. They believe they are victims of their circumstances, but I gave them free will. It is the greatest gift I ever gave mankind, and yet so many choose destruction. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. But Lord, they don't know. They don't see it. How can they choose when they don't even realize they are being deceived? Jesus turned to me, his expression both firm and gentle. That is why my people must speak. That is why the truth must be louder than the lie. I suddenly saw two paths before me. One path was wide, smooth, and beautiful. People walked down it without hesitation, but as they went further, I saw darkness swallowing them whole. They didn't even realize they were walking toward destruction. The other path was narrow and rough, filled with obstacles and challenges. But at the end of it, there was light, and Jesus was waiting there with open arms. Most will choose the easy path, Jasmine, he said. It is comfortable, it is safe, and it requires no sacrifice. But those who seek me, those who trust me, they will take the harder road, and I will lead them home. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking. What do I do? How do I help them see? He placed his hand on my shoulder, and instantly I felt his love pouring into me. Tell them the truth, Jasmine. Some will reject it. Some will mock you. But those who are mine will hear my voice, and when the time comes, they will know which path to take. Suddenly, I was no longer in the vision. I was back in the presence of Jesus. The weight of everything I had seen was still heavy on my soul. But now, I felt something else. Hope. Jesus turned to me, his voice steady. There are those who are already awake, Jasmine. The enemy cannot deceive them because they know my voice. These are the ones I have chosen to stand in the final days. I saw small pockets of light scattered across the world. People who refused to conform, who clung to Jesus despite the deception around them. I saw them praying, worshiping, encouraging each other, warning those who would listen. And I realized something. They weren't afraid. Even as the world around them grew darker, they stood firm. These are my warriors, Jesus said. Not with swords, not with violence, but with truth. And when the world turns against them, I will be their shield. Tears filled my eyes. I had seen so much suffering, so much deception. But now I saw something else. The power of those who stood with Jesus. They weren't powerful by the world's standards. Many were ordinary people, mothers, fathers, workers, students. But in the spiritual realm, they shined like the stars. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with purpose. Go back, Jasmine. Tell them what you have seen. Those who are mine will listen. I felt a pulling sensation, like something was dragging me back. I looked at Jesus, my heart breaking. Lord, I don't want to leave. I want to stay with you." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Your time is not yet finished. There are many who need to hear this, Jasmine. They need to know the truth before it is too late." The pull became stronger, and suddenly I felt myself being sucked away from the light. Everything became dark again. I felt pain, the weight of my body returning, the sound of machines beeping. Then I gasped for air. I was back in the hospital. My eyes fluttered open, and I saw my family standing around me, their faces filled with shock. I was alive, and I knew without a doubt that I had to share what Jesus had shown me. The moment I took my first breath back in my body, it felt foreign, as if I had been forced into something too small, too limiting. The weight of flesh, the aching of my limbs, the beeping of the hospital machines. It was all overwhelming. My eyes fluttered open, and I saw the faces of my family hovering over me. Tears streamed down their cheeks, a mixture of shock and relief. My sister clutched my hand tightly, whispering my name over and over as if saying it enough times would keep me here. The doctors had told them I wouldn't make it. My injuries were too severe, but God had other plans. As I adjusted to being back, memories of what I had seen flooded my mind. The city, the deception, the enemy's grip on humanity. It was all so clear in my spirit, and yet, when I looked into the eyes of my loved ones, I realized something terrifying. They had no idea. They had been living life unaware of the war happening above them. Tears welled up in my eyes. "I have to tell them," I whispered. My sister leaned closer. "Tell us what?" I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat was dry, my body weak, but inside me, there was an urgency I couldn't shake. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. I wasn't supposed to keep this to myself. I closed my eyes and prayed. "Lord, give me the strength to share what you have shown me." The machines beeped steadily beside me. I had been given a second chance, but not for my sake. It was for them, for all of you reading this. The days following my return were some of the hardest of my life. I tried to explain what had happened, but most people didn't believe me. My sister thought I was confused from the accident. My pastor told me that while near-death experiences were powerful, I should be careful not to scare people. Even some of my closest friends dismissed it as a dream. I felt alone, burdened with something too heavy to carry on my own. But deep in my heart, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Jesus had warned me that people wouldn't always listen. And then, I started to notice something strange. The things I had seen in my vision, they were already happening. News articles about implantable technology being used for payments, reports about digital identification systems replacing traditional banking, churches embracing AI and technology, convinced it was just modern progress. I knew I couldn't waste any more time, so I started talking to anyone who would listen. Some people dismissed me, but others, they felt it too. They had been seeing the changes, feeling the shift in the world, but they didn't have the words to explain it until I spoke. I realized then that I wasn't alone. God was already waking people up. I was just a messenger. But the hardest part, watching people I loved choose to ignore the truth. I could see the deception growing stronger every day, but I knew I had done my part. I had spoken the truth, and Jesus had already told me, some will listen, some will not. If you've made it this far, I know one thing. You were meant to hear this. This isn't just my story. This is a warning. Jesus didn't show me the things to frighten me. He showed me so I could warn you. The world is changing. The deception is already here, and the enemy, he's not coming with chains and force. He's coming with convenience and comfort. At first, it will seem harmless, helpful, logical. Then it will become necessary. And finally, it will be forced. I beg you, stay awake. Pray for discernment. Strengthen your faith now before it's too late. Jesus showed me that those who are His will be protected, no matter how dark the world gets. His light will shine brighter. But you must be willing to see the truth. You must be willing to choose Him, even when it's difficult, even when the world calls you crazy, even when it means walking the harder road. Because in the end, the only thing that will matter is your soul. And Jesus, He has already won the battle. Now, it's up to you to choose which side you're on. Will you listen, or will you wait until it's too late? I've done my part. Now, the choice is yours.